Hello, so today's video is all about the almost 20-year-old Canon 10D. And I can't quite believe that that time has gone by. It seems like only yesterday that I was buying this and about to head off on assignment somewhere. And this thing was a revelation when it came out in like 2003, I believe. And I've always had a bit of a soft spot for it, to tell you the truth. Now, I want to do a couple of different things with this video. You know, number one, it's a bit of nostalgia looking back at those early days of digital SLRs. And I wonder how many of my viewers might have started their digital journey with a camera very much like this one. You know, let me know in the comments. It's always good to hear from everyone. But also, it's a video for anyone that has an interest in this camera in this day and age, because I know that there might be a few people that are still shooting with it, and I'd really like to hear from you if you are, and why shouldn't you be, you know? But also, it's for anyone that's got, you know, not the biggest budget in the world, because not everyone has all the money, right? So, you know, and I've been quite poor in my life as a professional photographer, and I know what it's like not to be able to afford all of the latest gear that everyone else seems to be using. And so with that in mind, I found one of these this morning for sale secondhand for £20. 20 quid. What a bargain. That's 1% of what this thing cost when I bought it new. I think I paid over £2 for this back in the day. Now, it seems odd for me to talk about this camera without discussing this one as well, which was the D60, which was the camera that I bought about a year before this one. And roughly they're exactly the same. But I shot with them for so many years side by side that it just seems weird not talking about the D60 as well. But, you know, I don't know why I'm telling you that. It's just something that I feel the need to do. So I'm just going to put that over there and we'll talk about the 10D. So it really was a revelation. These cameras really were a revelation when they came out. It was in that time between moving from shooting film to digital, and there were a couple of other digital cameras around in between, namely a partnership between Canon and Kodak, or Nikon and Kodak. But those cameras were very expensive, very low resolution, and they were at a price point which meant that not a lot of freelance photographers could afford them. And so certainly the ones that I shot with were always supplied by whoever I was working for at the time. So these were my first digital SLRs, and good Lord, they made a difference to the way that we were working. And I was always quite amazed by the quality that was coming out of these cameras in that day and age. Now, as soon as the next generation of cameras came out, the 1D or the Nikon D1 or D2, whatever it was at the time, you know, everyone started deriding these cameras quite quickly and sort of ridiculing them. And I can remember having a conversation with another professional about the 10D, and he was just like, oh, they're just rubbish, awful. And, you know, I didn't really agree. I always quite liked it. I had a bit of a soft spot for it. Now, rather than go out and photograph some ducks in the park in the rain in England in the winter, I thought I'd show you some of the pictures that I shot with this camera during the time that I was actually using it professionally. And yes, I shot hundreds of paid assignments with this thing and travelled all over the world with it, shooting all kinds of different things. So I thought I'd dig some of those files out from some old DVDs and CDs, and good Lord, I've got loads of those things. And I copied some of the files onto my computer and then did a very quick edit in Lightroom, and I thought I'd show you some of the pictures. And, you know, you might be surprised, I'm going to show them to you now, you might be surprised of what a £20 second-hand camera could be capable of producing. So here we go. So it seems kind of crazy to me that what is now the bargain bucket deal of the year, bottom lowest price camera on some of the second-hand camera stores, you know, literally going for £20 was once the sort of state-of-the-art latest bit of technology for professional photographers who were travelling the world shooting assignments. It's kind of crazy. So I'll talk about the specs of this camera, then I'll go on to talk about some of the good things and some of the bad things about it, and some of the things that might actually be a deal breaker. So it's 6.3 megapixel CMOS APS-C size sensor, which could shoot at 3 frames per second and at a buffer of about 9 frames. But the buffer did fill up quickly, I remember, and I remember getting locked out of this camera quite often. Had an ISO range of 100 to 3200, I believe, but I don't think I ever shot it much above 800 because it's quite noisy. One compact flash card, memory card, and it has the Canon BP511 battery, which was always very okay, and you can still get hold of those today, and you get about 400 or 500 shots from each battery. Now in operation, the camera feels great. You know, it feels really evolved. It has all the buttons in just the right places. It really kind of was a descendant, I guess, of the film EOS cameras. I shot with the EOS 1 before this, and you know, you can really feel the evolution of design moving through. I have the battery grip for the bottom, which enables you to have the extra shutter button on the top for vertical shooting, which is very cool. And this camera has the control dial on the back, which a lot of other cameras kind of don't have these days, which means that you can control your shutter with the top and your aperture with the back, which is all very cool. Okay, so let's talk about image quality. Now, I didn't shoot RAW with this camera ever, for a number of different reasons. One being that memory cards were really expensive back in those days, so I only had, I think, 3 memory cards for it, compact flash cards. And the second reason was that the RAW software, RAW conversion software, was still in its infancy. And so there was a program that came with this thing that you could process raw files with, but it was quite slow. And so we weren't quite where we are now with things like Lightroom in terms of software that works quickly with RAW files. Probably the biggest reason why I never shot JPEG was that I was young and probably a bit more reckless and more keen to get to the bar. So JPEG was quicker and so therefore better. And so in those days I was less inclined to probably get involved in a conversation about the pros and cons of RAW versus JPEG. You know, it kind of wasn't really on my radar, and just getting the pictures processed and out to my clients and done, and so I could get to the pub, was probably far more important to me. You know, why not? And so I didn't ever shoot RAW. So I was looking at JPEGs on my computer, and the JPEGs roughly in terms of size are, you know, when they're compressed, they're between 1 to 3 megabytes, and when you open them up, they're about 18 megabytes. And I was really blown away by the quality, particularly the colour. The colour really comes through of those JPEGs. And I can't remember what settings I was using in the camera, but the colour really comes through, and it really has, in my opinion, that kind of Kodak feel that lots of people seem to be trying to emulate now with their RAW files, using different presets and settings and so on and so forth. It really has that nice look out of the camera, and I've just done a few tweaks to those pictures that you've seen. I haven't done a great deal of Photoshop work or anything excessive, just a few little tweaks to make them how I want them to look. I thought the colour was absolutely fantastic. And you know, Lightroom flies along, and it's actually lovely to work like that, because it kind of feels there's something quite analog about that experience, something quite nice about working with smaller files. And in terms of the size of the files, if you think that they're not going to be able to be enlarged properly, then you know, I would take issue with that because I've blown loads of pictures up. You know, this is a picture of a heron that I took, which this is a crop from the original file taken with this camera, and it looks absolutely fine close up. I've also had some billboards printed from this camera, and they look fine as well. I've had big panoramic prints made, and again, they look okay. And you know, in terms of end use from clients, a hefty big portfolio from back in the day of some of my work, but this front page is galore that I shot with this camera, and they look fine. You know, no problem at all. Okay, so it's time to talk about some of the bad things, and there are quite a few, I'm afraid. So we're going to go through them and list them, and you know, some of them aren't deal breakers and some of them might be. So to begin with, there's a few that I would like to call creative restrictions, which I think would be a fair way of looking at it, and everyone will have their own different opinions about it. You know, number one is it has a tiny LCD screen on the back, which is pretty much useless. No flippy screen, no live view, no video. The ISO capability is very low in comparison to modern cameras, and the resolution is very low. Even though we've demonstrated that it's perfectly usable, it's very low in comparison with anything more modern. Also, it's a bit slow. you know, in general, in its operation. Okay, now there are some more bigger issues which I think need to be talked about. Number one is that this thing does not have an EFS mount. Now, this was never a problem to me because I came from the EOS 1 film camera, so I had the full range of lenses which just fitted on here and it's kind of perfect. But for anyone now, it won't accept the EFS lenses, so you'll have to be quite creative in your lens choice, and there are a few options out there. But the EFS mount didn't come to this range of cameras until I think the next one along, the 20D. So if it's that EFS range that you're looking for, this won't be so good for you and you'll need to look at something more modern. Although there are kind of creative solutions that you can find, and you know, just worth pointing these things out. The next negative is that there is no dual cards, and I'm a big fan of dual cards these days. I probably wasn't back in the day, didn't even think about it, but I really like dual cards now, so that is an issue, but it probably wouldn't be for some other people. The other next issue is that this thing is a dust magnet. Good Lord, it caught the dust like, you know, just it. The next camera that came along, the 1DS Mark II, which I've also done a video about, which I bought, was even worse, but this thing was bad for a crop sensor camera. It has a small dark viewfinder, which is not the best thing in the world. So as you're looking as to compose and all of those things, when you're looking through the viewfinder, it's quite small and dark in comparison. That's not a good thing at all, but you can work with it. The next thing is that it just did not like low light. Now, you can probably see that from some of the pictures that I showed you, they were all shot on my travels on assignment all around the sunshiny places, mostly sunshiny places. And this camera is great under those kind of conditions. But in the dark, you know, if you were trying to photograph in the rain in England, you know, it never quite coped with those sort of dark conditions without producing noisy images. The last thing, I suppose, which is a negative, is it's quite hard to find a use case for it, because you can, for not a lot more money, you can find things that are significantly newer, and with newer comes faster and maybe slightly better and more flexible in terms of the lens mounts and things. And so, you know, this is a video that kind of, I'm not by any means saying that you should go out and buy one of these things, and I'm not saying that they're the worst thing in the world. I'm just trying to give an overall kind of picture of this camera in this day and age. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this video and it's been of some use to you in some way, shape or form. Like I said, leave me a comment if you've got any thoughts about this sort of the older days of digital SLRs and where we've come from and where we might be going. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.